I'm Todd Crawford,
And I'm Eric Zavinski.
and we are too cool for the comic shop. What do you want to talk about today that we didn't plan on discussing that's completely at random?
Yeah, it's completely spontaneous. Well, I am in the mood to talk about some giant lizard daddies. So I think it's time to talk about Godzilla.
Gex. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Godzilla.
There's been a lot of talk on the internet lately about how thick Godzilla's thighs are. So really, this is very well timed to record this.
Yeah, he has lightning breath, but he also has thunder thighs.
This is very true. And that is actually part of his dossier of superpowers, thunder thighs. It's in the Kaiju Encyclopedia. Look it up. Anyway, I actually just watched the original 1954 Godzilla for the first time this past weekend. I had never seen the original, and I think it was on HBO Max, and we have that for at least a couple months. So I was like, hey, it's a perfect chance to finally watch it. So I just watched that for the first time. But before that, I was a pretty big fan of Godzilla, starting with the 2014 American film by Gareth Edwards, which is the other film we'll be talking about today, because I think in both of our minds, that's like the actually not horrible American reimagining of the character in the franchise. We don't talk about that film from the 1990s because it's really bad.
Yeah, I don't remember them from the 90s other than the marketing and just bits and pieces. It had a really cool trailer. It had I forget what they're called now, but it's a trailer that's basically just a scene. It's not even in the movie, I don't think. And it's not showing clips from the movie. It's just a teaser just hinting at what you're going to see in the movie. And that was cool about it. And honestly, I don't have the harsh feelings towards the American Godzilla other people do, in the sense that it was its own thing. And I don't know. I kind of appreciate that. The older I get, the more I appreciate something just being weird in its own thing rather than just a lazy, retreading. It's not good. I'm not really into those kind of movies. The whole, what's it called now? That and Independence Day and all that director.
Right, I think it was a Roland Emmerich film,
Roland
right?
Emmerich, that's it. Yeah, the director of the American 2014 one. His name was tripping me up. Edwards. Yeah, it's Emmerich and Edwards. Yeah. And
yes,
I'm just not into those kind of movies, so it doesn't appeal to me. But I remember it being exciting as a kid, so I have fond memories for it. Maybe because the cartoon actually was good, based around that.
Right.
Movie.
I mean, 90s Godzilla is a very campy 90s disaster movie, but with bad acting, bad writing, and bad special effects. So
yeah, exactly.
But pretty much what it boils down to. So that's why we're going to be talking about two not as bad movies today, in my opinion.
Yeah, so we'll just kick things off with the 1954 one called it's called Gojira, is how it's really technically called, versus the Americanized version, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. But I'm not going to call it that because I'm not going to embarrass myself.
To me, is a different version altogether, because I watched the movie with subtitles and just as it was intended and created. But apparently there is this Americanized version with a English narrator and all this other crap.
Yeah, and I've seen both versions. I saw that version of the movie first, the American version, and I don't know what people say about it or what's thought of it, but it's interesting. I don't know. I see it more as a novelty. I'd never watched that rather than the original version. But right. I think it's interesting that it exists in the capacity that it does, that it's kind of half of another film.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of makes sense because decades ago, our culture in the West was way less open to accepting something in its pure form, from the East. Even anime and video games suffered some pretty heavy localization differences, really until this past decade. So it really has taken us a while to actually kind of catch up and just appreciate stuff made in the East. And I still think we don't in some degrees, but that was probably part of the reason why they had to Americanize it so much to get it to our theaters.
Yeah, I don't know how a dubbing would have done back then at that point, and honestly, the movie like Godzilla, what's interesting is it opens itself up to different perspectives where you can insert an American character to be kind of the avatar for the audience because it's a national disaster, so you can have different perspectives and all that. So it's interesting how they went that route, but we're not going to be discussing that movie at length. Um,
I,
that's something for I guess the Godzilla historians to break down the pros and cons of. But
of which they do exist. I actually have a friend who's watched like every single Godzilla film, and what is that, like 30 films or something? It's insane.
yeah, I have some friends that way back in the day they went on an adventure to review every single Godzilla movie, and I have a few friends
Oof.
who have seen them multiple times and talk about them at length. And I'm not at that level. I think I've seen like 15 to 20 of them, and that's all. But I kind of like the idea there always being more out there that I haven't seen yet.
Right. You can't finish the watching spree until like you're very old and withered. Watch the 70th Godzilla movie on your 90th birthday.
That's the thing. Yeah, you got to save something for the nursing homes. You have something to look forward to
Yeah,
later
right.
on in life.
Yeah, something to do.
But also, I mean, I love these movies. I have fun with a lot of them, but like it's kind of a lot because a lot of them are just campy. A lot of them are boring through the human parts. And that's not even talk about the American film, but in the Japanese ones, most of them, like, the humans are boring. They suck. It's really not why you watch the movies at all. And compared to even something like Friday the 13th or whatever, that's just like I could watch 3 of those in a night, and I'm not as big of a Friday the 13th fan as people probably think I am. But it's like M&Ms, whereas Godzilla feels like a Snickers bar. You're not going to eat 5 Snickers bars in one day.
At least you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And talk about the original film. It starts out mostly concerning extras. And the first thing that struck me about the original film was that the extras, the actors who are just in the disaster scenes and all of that, are honestly doing a pretty good job. I think the extras are better actors than like the main characters in the 54 film.
That's interesting. I think how do you feel in general watching it, because it is what is a 65-year-old movie now, if not a little bit older. How did you feel watching it for the first time in 2021?
Right. It is very old at this point. I mean, watching it, I was honestly really impressed. I mean, because you got to watch something in the context of when it was made. And if you watch it with that lens, God, it's really impressive. I mean, the effects that they're able to pull off with scale and the physical, miniatures and the dioramas, like, of course, some of it doesn't always gel, but like everything concerning Godzilla is like really, really good for that time. I don't know if anything really rivaled it at the time.
I mean, you could of course say King Kong, which had already come out, and Godzilla was kind of a reaction to. But I think even there's a big difference between Godzilla and King Kong, which is King Kong was mostly stop motion. So
Right.
even though it's very similar and it's obviously draw conclusions, even to the point where like Gojira in its original language means I think whale ape or something. Ape's definitely in there. Whereas in American it translates to Godzilla, big monster or big lizard, but like the comparisons are there. But I think it is kind of a different game altogether, in a sense. It's almost like a football, American football, and like football like soccer in other countries.
I guess that kind of explains why the upcoming Kong versus Godzilla disturbs me so much, because it doesn't feel like it should be in the same universe, because they were like related, but like their productions, they're related, not in like their universes. That's why I kind of don't like it.
Yeah, I don't personally give a shit because like I think it's the 4th original Godzilla movie is Godzilla versus King Kong. There's been
Oh, really?
various other Toho King Kong movies that I haven't seen.
I'll see, and I'm a noob in all of that knowledge, so maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's like a different thing between King Kong, the original film, and then the character King Kong, which is crossed over and done other things. There's various unofficial sequels, to my understanding, like Son of King Kong, which I've actually owned for the better half of a decade now, and never seen, and some others. And I don't know much about that. I will say I've recently watched King Kong, more recent than the Godzilla movies, any of them. And I have to admit, I mean, King Kong is just a better movie. I mean, it's just better in almost every foreseeable way. And like, I love Godzilla. I am a Godzilla fan of the character much more so than King Kong. But just looking at it as a movie, I mean, King Kong is absolutely good as you can get with a giant monster movie of its era. I have to concede finally after all the years of being a Godzilla guy. It's like when I finally accepted that DC was better than Marvel, where it's like I was always a Marvel guy, and I'm talking purely comics here, but I don't really like Marvel movies, so I guess that too. But like there's just a point where it's like, you know what? Yeah, this is just better quality. There's no use denying it.
I totally get that, and I actually haven't seen the original King Kong nor like the 2005 version, which I also hear people like. So I have zero King Kong experience, so that's totally fair. I'm sure those are great.
Yeah, that can be another episode for another day, maybe.
It could be another episode once I brush up on my gosh darn homework. Going back to the Lizard Daddy, yeah, because like there's an actor in a suit for the monster in this film, and that is why it's so different on the production level.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, I think they do a really good job with miniatures and everything. The most recent time I saw this film was actually in the theaters, 2018, I believe, and it was great. It really held up well, I think. Another thing that I want to get into is like the sound design, like the score for the movie is pretty memorable in my opinion. The classic screonk noise, it just works really well.
I completely agree. There's a lot of iconic things that were established in this movie. The sound is not as, pleasant to the ear, of course, because again, there's 60 plus years, between the films here. Or actually, is it? I think it's like 60 years exactly between this film and the Gareth Edwards version.
I think there was like a big thing where it's like, oh, it's the anniversary of the original film. We're gonna do
right. Yeah, so actually it is 60 years apart. So being 60 years apart, some of the sound design, it's iconic, but it's a little screechy. In the original film, that's a product of age. There were a couple editing flubs, I think. Like there was one scene where like the main girl stood up from her chair and then she like stood up from her chair again, and it's like, oh, I think that was just a wonky cut or something.
Well, don't say you've never been at work and there's maybe an announcement made and it was so exciting you had to get up from your chair twice.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe that was a very
Did you ever see
telling
Birdemic?
Thematic? Yeah.
There's a shot in that movie that they repeat like 3 times of everybody in the office. It's like a pan shot of everybody in the office laughing, like clapping and having like this reaction shot, but they do it like 3 times. It's clearly the same exact shot that they just recycle of the same people doing the same actions, and it's so funny.
Yeah, there were a couple like quirky moments like that in this movie. I mean, do you care much about like the human plot in this film? Because I understand why it's there, and the whole getting the spoilers, the whole eye patch science boy and his oxygen destroyer is obviously supposed to further the allegory of perverting science, and human greed's gonna take over and make another nuclear bomb, and but then the Japanese people do not fall into that pattern of aggression, and he kills himself. I understood why it was there, but I wasn't feeling the emotions from the actors at all.
Yeah, I think it's not what I think about when I think about the movie immediately usually, but I do think it's handled better in this film than many of the sequels. This one, at least, I remember the characters. I remember the relationship. I remember the science guy. His sacrifice at the end, I like and think about.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not
neither science guy.
it's not the most compelling plot. It's not the most original, but I think it's one of the most serviceable. And in the kaiju genre, in my honest opinion, that's about as
Right.
good as you get. I mean,
Well, I'm sure you have
the bar
obviously
is
more to
not
compare
high.
it to. You have like a dozen other films you've seen in this genre, and honestly, if I had seen all the films that you've seen, I'd probably be like, oh my god, freaking masterful human plot compared to the other movies.
Yeah, I mean that's really how it is, and that's even the good ones. That's even the ones I love, like Godzilla versus Mothra and stuff like that. Like I love those movies. I even like the human characters and stuff, but like it's ridiculous, it's weird, it's wacky, it's fun. That's part of the charm. One of my favorites, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. I couldn't tell you a thing about the main characters. This film, I can at least be like, oh yeah, the scientist guy, his sister, she's dating the dude or whatever. Like, I kind of remember them, and I have to give credit for
But it's
that.
actually a love triangle.
Oh,
So
that's right. Is it her
a
ex-boyfriend
part of the
is a
tension
scientist?
is that she has to tell the science dude that she's fucking this other dude, and they don't like. She doesn't say it until like super late in the movie, and it's like, I don't care.
Yeah, no, I get that, because he's like, that's the thing with women, is that you're trying to get your life together and do things, and you're making scientific advancements and stuff, and then they drop a bomb on you like that, like I'm fucking another dude, and you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna take the fucking oxygen destroyer, just go to the fucking bottom of the ocean and just blow myself up. And that's really what the movie's about, or at least how I interpret
Really?
it.
I agree. That's why I'm a gay man.
How women just drive men to suicide.
That's the real plot. There's no Western aggression metaphor here. That's what the movie's about.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really just a big
Brian.
MacGuffin to trick the suits into thinking it's about war and the atom bomb, but really it's just about women being bitches.
Right. Todd's had a rough couple of weeks, folks. Hey, I will say, I didn't expect Godzilla to get like disintegrated and like atomized to a skeleton. So answer me this, Todd. Is there like more than one Godzilla, or is there just like 10 different canons of Godzilla?
I think I kind of see this both. Like, I'm pretty familiar with the next film, Godzilla Raids Again, which I think I'm one of the only people that really enjoys that movie as much as I do. That's one of my favorites, but I don't believe they ever mention like, oh, there's another Godzilla, or maybe they do, but like I don't even know how it's explained, to be honest.
Right.
Like, I think
See,
it's kind of
that goes to show that the details are not very important.
yeah, because there's a big thing with that. Specifically the first one, where there's kind of different canons where like some sequels only recognize the first film, some go off of others, and all that.
Oh,
So like you get a lot of that shit. I do like
sounds
that
like
it's
a mess.
self-contained, and Godzilla is killed at the end of this one. It's one of the only ones in which he is.
Right. So, I mean, you could definitely do just this movie and nothing else ever in your life related to Godzilla, and you'd be good to go, at least for a contained story.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would enjoy this film that may not enjoy the others, because I do think that this one's higher quality than a lot of the other ones, and the other ones are good. There's definitely like different ranges and different kinds of sequels where it's like, the next one's a little goofier, but it's still kind of in line with this one, which is one of the things I like about, especially like that era of filmmaking. There's like the Heisei era and the Showa era and shit like that, and I can't even pronounce them, let alone get into the differences right now, but there's the campier ones, and there's a reboot ones that try to change the tone. But I think this film generally is just more accessible to people who aren't just nerds.
Right. I mean, it's basically a classic, I would say. It's definitely going for a more artsy angle than I assume probably a lot of the other ones do.
Exactly. And
I mean, it just makes me think, though, it definitely developed a following, even if you haven't seen all of the movies or even a lot of the movies. I remember there were like video games in the 2000s where it was like a fighting game and there was like 30 different Godzilla monsters and you can like fight each other over cities and stuff. And it's like stuff like that was like my first introduction to the character. And I remember some video game magazines growing up where there was like movie posters for Final Wars and like that era of Godzilla. And I just remember being exposed to the character, but just not really like consuming any of its media for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, Godzilla's kind of like Star Wars in that way, where you don't have to see the movies to know the character. Not nearly as ubiquitous.
So suffused through pop culture that you're at least going to know something about it.
Yeah, like my exposure to Godzilla as a kid was I had Godzilla children books that I don't know where I got them from or how, but there's picture books like one sentence on each page, that kind, and really great like hand painted illustrations. And then there was a cartoon that I loved that had a Godzuki, who's known as the Jar Jar Binks of Godzilla. And I love that show. Then there was the tie-in show for the Roland Emmerich movie, which is also good. And then I remember my brother rented a Godzilla movie, and that was the first one I saw as a kid. And I later found out which one it was, but I don't remember right now. I just remember it begins with like a boat, and I think there's two brothers are trying to steal a boat or something like that. And it was so weird to watch as kids, though, because we were so excited for Godzilla, and then it was subtitled. And just kind of like, I don't even know if it was subtitled or if we had the dub on, but I just remember being off compared to normal movies that we had seen. Because, I didn't watch foreign films when I was roughly 6.
Right. It is very interesting. And it's funny how it's just kind of timeless too, because now that we have all these movies in the 2010s and the MonsterVerse and all this stuff, and regardless of your opinions on it, it's still definitely stood the test of time. And they even kind of made another Godzilla era. They started another Godzilla era a few years ago in Japan.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with it. I don't think they're continuing that, because they did Shin Godzilla, and they had briefly discussed a second one. But I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it was ever likely to happen. I think they're going a different direction, where they just want to make it how it used to be back in the day, where there's like 10 Godzilla movies, and there's a Mothra movie, and then there's a King Ghidorah movie, and so on and so forth, and they cross over. And they kind of want... I don't want to say it's kind of like Marvel, because it was so far before Marvel, but it's that kind of business model. It seems to be their approach they want to take with the future of Godzilla, which... I'm fine with. Personally, Shin Godzilla is my favorite Godzilla movie by quite a bit. I know a lot of people disagree. It seems like if you're a Godzilla fan, you hate that movie. But that one's my personal favorite, and I'm also totally fine with it being a one-off. So I usually like most Godzilla content, so I'm cool with it.
I did a little research on it. It seems like there's a good amount of similarities between the horror film and Shin Godzilla, but it's kind of like a modern retelling of it in certain ways.
Yeah, and so it definitely takes Godzilla, makes it allegorical again, where this one's kind of a satire on bureaucracy and the inefficiency of government to handle natural disasters, specifically paralleling something that fucking happened that it did happen in America, so I don't know what it was.
I read it was like a tsunami in 2011 or something, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was something like, I didn't want to say a flood or something because it didn't seem right, but yeah, it's kind of paralleling that, and it's a bit of a funny movie. It's kind of quirky, but the Godzilla himself, he has, I think, 3 or 4 different forms throughout the film, so he evolves, which is new to the series, and that's pretty interesting and a good way to shake things up, I thought. And
so Godzilla became a Pokemon.
Basically, that's the approach with it. It really is kind of that way, and it's a mixture of CGI and puppetry or whatever, suits. So it's a really weird, jarring look that I think is effective, and really cool movie.
It's interesting. I think I will have to watch it at some point, but I haven't yet. So before we move on to the 2014 film, I guess what would you rate the first film, the 54 film, as?
It's hard to give it a rating, especially because I recently saw King Kong, and like that's higher, so it's hard to give a higher rating. But like, especially for its genre, I have to give it an A+, because it's not a perfect movie necessarily, but it's a very important movie. It's a very iconic movie, and it works in every way that it needs to, It doesn't have the best love triangle in the world or anything. But as far as
Right.
kaiju movies go, this is the gold standard. It is as absolutely good as it gets, and it would feel wrong to give it less than A+. And when I watch it, it is an A+ watching it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because I'm not familiar with kaiju as a genre, really, and I just kind of see them as, spectacle movies. I mean, I would give it like a B, which I think is high, and it's because I'm probably not as familiar with trends that it's set and what it's done for cinema, but just kind of comparing it to other movies in a bubble, I still think it's a strong B, which is, I think, pretty high praise for an action movie from '54. So I did enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah, so next up, we're going to talk about a much more recent movie, 2014, Gareth Edwards' Godzilla. And it's an interesting one to discuss, I think. I think it's because there was a lot of hype before it came out, like a lot, as I recall. And I remember thinking this is going
Yeah,
to
I mean, I
be
have my own hype story. I remember watching I think the original teaser trailer, which is actually a scene from very late in the movie where they do the halo jump from the helicopters into like the burning, was it San Francisco or something, and then like the imagery of it was so freaking striking, and Godzilla was massive as hell, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so here for this. So that was like when I knew I was going to go see it, and I was really hyped going in.
exactly. I remember thinking this is going to be like the Rise of the Planet of the Apes for Godzilla, and it had
Right.
Kick-Ass was in it, and so is Bryan Cranston, and Elizabeth Olsen wasn't really named then, but it would matter today if she was in it. And
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a movie that I think probably helped build her name, just like Age of Ultron, which again,
Sally Hawkins
Kick-Ass
is in it
guy,
too.
her, they were siblings in Age of Ultron, and they were like making out in this film because they're married. So that was really funny.
Yeah, I remember that. Um, I think the biggest issue with this movie is that it had A+ marketing, and it wasn't an A+ movie.
Which isn't like the worst problem to have because, like, hey, I love good marketing too. So I mean, it works out. I still think it's a really good film, um, and certainly the best American adaptation we've ever attempted.
I wouldn't agree with that, but I think that it's kind of a grab bag where there's different pros and cons between this and the sequel, King of the Monsters. And they're trying to replicate different eras of Godzilla too, which is understandably jarring.
Right. They're trying to accomplish a lot in two films that like 30 films accomplished in Toho.
Exactly, and for me personally, like I remember, I mean, he gave arguably my favorite performance of all time in Friday Night Lights, but like I remember Kyle Chandler more in that movie than Kick-Ass in this, but you also get the cringy, stupid jokes in it and stuff like that too. So that's kind
Yeah.
of the trade-off that you have to put up
Obviously,
with
we're not
that
going to talk
shit.
about King of the Monsters too much, but I was not feeling the plot of King of the Monsters at all. So, I mean, that really kind of took away a lot of my enjoyment of that film. I know that the characters aren't super stellar in this film, especially since spoilers that like Bryan Cranston's character dies pretty early on. So, there's only so much investment that you're going to have in the characters, but I really liked the tone of the 2014 film, and you really do have a sense of like dread and tension throughout the whole movie, which is something I didn't have watching King of Monsters 5 years later.
Yeah, and that's what I like about WB and how it handles this big franchises. And there's a lot of similarities, oddly enough, between this and the DC, whatever it is, DC EU, I think,
Right.
with that. But they always have very striking imaging and great marketing in their films. And even people who don't like them, I think, can agree with that much. And I think
Yeah.
that King of the Monsters goes more for like awe and like capturing you watching Destroy All Monsters as a kid or whatever on TV, and now giving it a
Yeah.
Hollywood budget where it's like a big campy blockbuster popcorn movie, but with hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. And
I
this
agree
one,
with that because King of the Monsters trailer was all about like the orchestrated music and like just all the monsters showing up in the trailers. So like even though it didn't end up being my favorite film, I can definitely agree with that.
And this film tried to replicate the disaster movie stuff from the original Godzilla film. And I like both those, so I'm happy with both films. In some ways, in others I'm not thrilled with them in others, but this film, the first act is the strongest, I think, which is largely like you mentioned, because Bryan Cranston kind of carries a movie, and his plot with his son and the loss of his wife and his obsession with Godzilla. I think it's a good way to lead into the disaster. I think that when it's him and Kick-Ass going through the radioactive site, I think it's fun, it's exciting. And then he immediately falls and breaks his hip and dies. But up until that point, I don't think the movie has the issues the rest of the film does. And I think, like, I know everybody says it, but keeping Bryan Cranston alive at least until like maybe not halfway through, maybe like 2/3 of the way through, maybe right before the third act begins or something, at least that long, really could have fixed a lot of the issues.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. It almost comes off as like it's very sudden. Like, I mean, he definitely dies in an action sequence, right? But like it's still sudden in the way that it's like, oh, that character's gone already? Like, it almost feels like they didn't have enough budget to like pay for him for the whole movie or something.
That's the thing. It really feels that way. It's supposed to be shocking, and it is, but like not in the way intended, in my opinion. And I don't.
It'd be like if the science guy who's like talking about, oh, we should study Godzilla and not nuke it or whatever in the 54 film, if he had died in the first 20 minutes, that would be jarring, right? Like, so that would be weird.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it feels. Like, I understand that character structurally will most likely die in the film. I know that going into it. But it just feels like an unfinished plot point. It just feels dropped, like you said, almost because of scheduling or budget or something. And to my understanding, it wasn't. It was just a plot decision made. And I think an objectively bad one. And I don't think he could have saved the movie, but it could have really smoothed it out for me a lot with the other stuff. And I'm not as hard on it as a lot of people are. But I think that would have helped the movie a lot. Also, which is introduced basically in the same scene, is Muto, which fucking sucks.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the whole thing about this movie, right? It's going for the hero Godzilla, protector of Earth thing. If it's going for that, it needs some other monster to fight, I guess, right? So do you think it sucks because they made Godzilla like a hero, or do you think it sucks because that monster isn't memorable?
Yeah, no, that's a good point to bring up. I don't mind Godzilla being a hero. I don't mind him being alongside the boats. I get why that'd be weird to some people that, like, you know, went into it expecting what they think Godzilla is. But there's been various movies where he was the hero and somewhere he wasn't. The marketing doesn't really lead you to think that, and I understand why that would be weird to people. But for the tone they're going for these movies, especially King of the Monsters more so than this one, it makes sense to me. I'm cool with that. It's a little bit of an interesting decision, but I don't think it's even a bad one, even just from like a marketing standpoint or whatever. But I'm cool with it as a fan of the series. I just think that Muto is just such a generic Hollywood big monster that just I don't like Cloverfield at all. I really don't care for Cloverfield or the sequel. I didn't see the third one because I didn't like the first two movies. But it just looks like one of those monsters from Cloverfield. And I don't have an issue with the monster in Cloverfield. But then it became the go-to alien design, in my opinion, like this, or even a movie that I really love. I really, really enjoyed A Quiet Place, the John Krasinski, Emily Blunt movie. I thought that movie was great. But the alien design sucked. And it's all just the Cloverfield monster again. And when you have such a wealth of different monsters to choose from with Godzilla, with his different friends and foes, and then it's introduced, we're going to make a new one for this movie. That's fine. That's cool. I'm open to a new monster, of course. But it's so forgettable. It's so generic. It's just a weak villain to pit Godzilla up against, sadly, in the debut American movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just a filler creature. Because I don't hate it as much, because obviously I don't really have the expectations going into this film about any other Godzilla character he's going to fight against, because I didn't know most of the Godzilla monsters in any way, right? I mean, like watching the film for the first time, I was like, huh, this thing is probably a thing, and some other movie from the 60s or the 80s or whoever. Then I like watched special features when the movie came out and found out, oh, they just made it up, and I was like, oh, just kind of more underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, there's parts of it that I kind of like, such as like there was the male and the female one, so they kind of tag team. I thought that made for a cool fight dynamic. The laying the eggs thing, you know, it kind of reminds me a bit of Mothra, especially because I believe they're winged or whatever. I didn't remember the fucking. I remember like part of the design of this fucking thing, but it's just so generic.
And I think some of the things they do with the Mutos is interesting, as in, you know, you have a rising action of both of them meeting together in the same city, and the egg thing gives the human soldier boy something to do. Where Godzilla is like actually fighting the monsters. So I do like the climax of the film quite a bit because there's constantly action. And I think the Godzilla action happens for just enough amount of time for it to be interesting, even though it's really dark. And I kind of wish it wasn't as dark, but that's a separate issue. And then it cuts to the human action, which is less exciting, but I do think it's kind of got that like Star Wars thing going on where it's like, all right, time to look what's happening on land and look what's happening in the sky, back on land, back on sky. So I do like the finale, but I do also agree that the monsters, Mutos, also that's a shitty name, the Mutos are pretty memorable.
Yeah, and you brought up the eggs. I'm glad you brought that up because like I do like the Kick-Ass giving something to do. I almost wish that like if Bryan Cranston, he could have like died doing that or something, where it's like, oh, one of us has to stay to blow this up, some stupid typical bullshit in a movie like that. That to me would have felt much more fitting. And then of course,
it's funny because they do kill off the Ken Watanabe character like that in kind of a cheesy "I must die here" way in King of Monsters. So they kind of give that to you in the sequel.
They do, and it's sad that they kill him off, but I think that was a good way to do it. I wish they would have kept Sally Hawkins' character in it. I hate how she's killed off in that movie. It's shocking. It's an effective scene in a way that is better than Bryan Cranston, but like, A, I just love Sally Hawkins. I want to see more of her, but B, if you're going to kill Ken Watanabe like that, I almost wish they would have killed off some other character, like the jokester dude that sucks. Any one of the two or three of them.
But that wouldn't be impactful. That wouldn't make the weebs cry, Todd.
Yeah, that's true. But but shit, what was I gonna say? Yeah, the climax is like generally I like it. I do think there's a scene, and you know which show I'm talking about because I think everybody remembers it, where it's going through the building, it's destroyed, then it shows Godzilla about to fight the Muto, and it cuts away on the TV. It's one of the things everybody complained about this movie came out, and like.
Yes, because they're like at the airport in Hawaii or some shit, right?
I believe that's it, yeah. And it is so
Foot
cheap.
comes down and it's like so massive, and you're like, oh my god, Godzilla is like 400 feet tall. This is going to be epic. And then it's like, nope, leave that for the end. I'm like, god damn it. They could have given it. I mean, I truly do think it's a pretty good criticism because we really only get one Godzilla fight, and it's at the very end of the movie. So I do think it's a valid criticism. They could have given us two fights.
Yeah, and it could have been quick. It didn't have to be huge. Like Godzilla is in the movie less than some of the others, of course, but like just a 2 or 3 minute fight, even that much alone.
Just jerk me off a little bit. I don't have to come yet. Like leave that for the end of the movie, but like I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think like
to get excited.
Keeping Cranston alive for 2/3 of the movie till the egg scene and giving us just a taste of the fight at the second part. I get they can't do it too much and in the daylight because then what will the climax? How will that be more exciting? Maybe he could have killed off one of the two, but then that would have gotten rid of like the consequences in the climax. But like they could have done.
They obviously fought. So they could have just shown the fight. It didn't even have to have consequences, really.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, they could have just fucking.
I mean, this is an action movie at the end of the day. I don't need every action scene to have a consequence. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think what it was, honestly, is that in the daylight, and this is why these movies do it, and I get it, and I don't criticize it. I know why other people do, but like the fights are always in the dark. They're always in the rain. They're always like heavily in smoke and mist because it's cheaper to do the CGI that way. And quite frankly, like, I'm not going to criticize that because the older movies, they fought in the daylight because the suits don't cost anymore in the daylight, and everybody knew they were
Right.
cheesy and silly, so it didn't really matter. In a big Hollywood budget movie where it costs so much per second, I'm not going to criticize them for it, but like, you know, if you're going to give us a teaser of a fight in broad daylight, then show the fucking fight.
Yeah. No, I agree. Just a little bit more, because like, yeah, CGI is expensive, but I think that is something that they struggled with this movie. I think they did want more of a budget, and perhaps they earned a bigger budget for King of Monsters or something. And who knows, maybe this new Kong versus Godzilla will have like 4 fights or some shit, and it's going to be crazy. But, I mean, it still works for the kind of movie that this is. It's still trying to be the disaster movie. The sense of scale is always really good in this movie. The effects when they are there for the fights and the creatures are like really, really good. And I still contend that Halo jump scene is the best scene in the movie.
Yeah, that scene's great. You get Andy Serkis is Godzilla in this one, so it's kind of interesting that we go from like suits, like literally wearing suits, to mocap, which I think is kind of an interesting progression.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I think so. Look it up.
What?
I think I got the IMDb right here. I should have checked before saying that, but I was so confident that I
didn't know
question
anybody
it.
was like mocapping for this shit.
Yeah, give me a second here.
I
I'm
gotta
going
know that
see
now.
full cast. Maybe I just lied, but I'm pretty sure. I'm just gonna look.
Is it a person though?
Control F, Godzilla. So okay, so the voice of Godzilla. Oh wait! I saw Andy Serkis's name here. Maybe he was just a consultant or some weird shit. So yeah, it says Andy Serkis, motion capture performer, Godzilla, uncredited.
What? I did not know that.
Yeah, I don't think they revealed it until like, I don't know, maybe it was before the movie, but I remember it was like later on they eventually said he was the one playing Godzilla, which is pretty cool.
How do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, I guess Benedict Cumberbatch was like crawling around on the floor for Smog in the Hobbit movies. So I mean, anything's possible.
Yeah, I guess maybe they had a fake city set up or something, or it's probably just a green screen room, and he just stomped around. I don't know that
Furries do that at conventions all the time.
Yeah, I don't know that he needed to be Godzilla to, I don't know how much emoting or whatever was needed, or body language. Maybe I'm not properly
It wasn't like a
appreciating it.
Caesar or a Gollum role, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, but cool. I'm fine with that. I
didn't know. I thought they were just making up what a big lizard would look like moving around, but
no,
who am I to say?
They do replicate
Yeah, I mean,
the scene.
I don't know how you replicate.
And Roland Emmerich's version, where the main character and Godzilla are like on the ground, they're eye to eye, and they look at each other, and they're both just like Mondays, And I was so shocked.
I think the Roland Emmerich Godzilla is actually more human-like than our big thick boy Godzilla, because like big thick boy Godzilla, like humans don't look like that. I don't know how you mocap that.
Yeah, I don't really know, and this version of Godzilla for me kind of reminds me of like a cat or like a dog or something. Like, I don't know, it's not a very human performance, but
I can't question pure artistry, so who knows.
yeah, I really hope my hope for the MonsterVerse, which I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say now I don't give half a fuck about at all. I'm not even watching Godzilla versus Kong. I have no interest, because the director is such shit that I'm just not gonna watch it because I hate his movies so much. And
yes,
I didn't.
You told me that off camera.
I didn't
off audio.
see Skull Island, which I've heard people say is actually a pretty fun movie, but it didn't look good to me, so I didn't watch it.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat there. I didn't watch that either.
It just looked
So
irritating.
I don't know. I'm more of a Godzilla guy because of the character, and I haven't seen the Kong films. But obviously, the good King Kong films, I don't think are anything like Kong Skull Island in this upcoming movie. So they're really like two separate things in my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, but my thoughts for MonsterVerse is that I just want to see the Godzilla victory dance, like he did in versus I think Astro Monster is the American title. That was one of the first movies
Sounds like
I
I need a
saw.
gift of this.
Yeah, you got to look that up. That's one of my favorite just pieces of film ever. Godzilla doing his victory. He's on the fucking moon too. That movie's so boring and weird, and oddly enough, so many of the shots parallel 2001: A Space Odyssey. But the Godzilla victory dance is a work of beauty.
That's a lot to take in. I'm gonna have to look that up. Yeah, I think we've went over the two movies pretty well. What would you rate the 2014 film?
You know, it's funny because I saw it in theaters, and then I did a review of it back then, and I gave it a B. I said it's a perfectly fine B movie, and that's probably the most not me. I don't want to say accurate, but it's the most appropriate rating to give it. And I've been thinking about it a lot, like if I change it higher, lower, and I'm gonna stick with a B. I feel like it's got a lot of high points. It's got a lot of flaws. I think when it does well, it does really, really well. And unfortunately, so when it does stumble, it kind of makes it hurt a little worse because you can see the potential. But I do like this movie.
Yeah, I can pretty much agree with all those points. I would give it a B, maybe a B plus if I was just really in the mood to watch it that day. I think the last time I watched it was in preparation for King of Monsters a couple years ago. Definitely really enjoy it. Like you said, like Godzilla stuff, Bryan Cranston stuff, the stuff that it does well, super good. So that's why some of the other parts of the movie kind of peter out, in my opinion. Yeah, I think we're both on the B scale, right?
Yeah.
And since I'm not a huge Godzilla guy, I much like the original 54 and the 2014 pretty comparably. I think they both have their strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, 6 years later, that sequel, or that reimagining is more refined in a lot of ways. But I like those two movies quite a bit.
For me personally, the original Godzilla is it's my number two personally, but I recognize it as the best Godzilla movie. I haven't seen like versus Destroya, for instance, which most hardcore fans that I know say is the best one. So I can't go off stuff like that, but I've seen my fair share of Godzilla movies. Like I said, I'm well into the double digits at least. And
It's impressive.
I would say personally that the original film's right at the top, and this 2014 version for me it's kind of in the middle. It's kind of a weird one because it's not as eccentric as some of the even the lesser bad ones. Like I'm a huge fan of Son of Godzilla. I've seen that film probably 5 times. I love it. I think it's incredible. But it's pure camp and cheese, you know. So how do you compare that to this? And I'd rather watch that movie any day of the week. I like that movie much more. But they're just going for two different things entirely. You know, it's like a long distance sprint, or it's a sprint versus a javelin throw, so to speak. It's just two different things. And I think this film's like probably in the middle, maybe even like the bottom quadrant of Godzilla movies for me, just because the entertainment value isn't quite as there. But I say this all the time. I think Godzilla fans. So if you just go to the movies because you want to watch a popcorn movie and you're disappointed in this Godzilla movie, I get it. If you're a Godzilla fan and you go to this movie and you're like pissed, I kind of get it, because there may not be as much stuff, or it may not have the same tone that you want if you want a certain campy vibe or whatever, which King of the Monsters would be much more up your alley. But when it comes to boring characters or Godzilla not being in enough of the movie, I hate to break it to people, but that's every fucking Godzilla movie I've ever seen.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, like, it's not The Godfather when Godzilla's not on screen. Like, I love the movies, I like them, but I think this movie's pretty comparable to a decent amount of the Japanese Godzilla movies. And It's not one of the best, but I personally think it's far from the worst.
and you're never gonna get like a full movie of that. I think maybe the closest thing you would get is if there was like animated movies of Godzilla, which maybe there are. I don't know.
There are.
But,
Netflix has a trilogy of them, which I've never seen and
trilogy.
don't have much
Oh my
interest
gosh.
in. But yeah, I know. I've seen the cartoons.
Like if you want
but-
Godzilla nonstop, I think that would be the best way to get it, I guess.
Yeah, I've always been interested in a Monster Island Godzilla movie that's basically like War of the Planet of the Apes or something, where it's mostly that. But what's the plot? What's who? You know what I mean?
I think it's a romantic comedy, and Godzilla and Mothra are like on a will they won't they kind of relationship.
I'd be into that. That's what I love about Son of Godzilla so much is like half the movie's just Godzilla being a shitty parent, just a negligent, abusive parent, and Godzilla just
Oh, that's
looks
awesome.
like the absolute worst suit. It's so goofy, and I love
What's
imagining a
the
full
movie
grown man.
where Godzilla like zooms around on his tail and it makes no sense physics wise?
Oh, I believe that's Godzilla versus I forget what it's called, like the slime monster or whatever. It's a weird psychedelic one. That one's fascinating. It is
Yikes.
such a weird movie, and I really enjoyed that one. That was actually the most recent one that I've seen. I think it's that
Oh.
one. I'm almost positive, but that one's a good time. That's a bad movie, but it's a good bad movie.
Hey, if a bad movie is a good time, that's still entertainment.
Exactly. What more can you ask for?
Oh, I think that's a good note to end on than anything.
Yeah, well, I'm Todd Crawford,
I'm Eric Zavinski.
and we are Too God for the Zilla Shop.
Nice.